And I want to thank very much Etopia. I love that name. Etopia is right? The organization here. And I want to thank, of course, Oïkos and my wonderful host all of these days. It really has been, Dirk Hollemans, it really has been extraordinary. He has made me walk kilometers through very beautiful cities. Ghent, my God, what a beauty. And Brussels, very beautiful. You can't quite have that kind of enthusiasm about the beauty of Brussels that one can have for Ghent. So I have really very little time to speak here in my terms, and I'm going to try to discipline myself. So first, just picking up on what Guy said, one way of framing what I've done in this research is to say that we have moved, and really it begins in the 1980s, to a systematicity. You can't quite call it system, but a systemics, if you want, that is dominated. That doesn't mean that it accounts for everything, but that the framing logic is a logic of extraction. So I talk, of course, mining, we think of mining, but I also say that high finance, unlike traditional banking, is extractive. So extraction means that you go, you take it out, and then you just leave. You don't care about that site. And one can juxtapose this to the dominant logic, and again, it's not everything, but it's an organizing logic of the earlier Keynesian period, after World War II. That was capitalism. That was brutal. They made us buy stuff that was really, really unhealthy to eat, to wear, all those plastics or whatever, synthetics. It was but there was a kind of built-in irony into that, because it was mass consumption driven. Mass consumption was the dominant logic, which meant that the more people could consume, the more the sons and daughters of the existing middle classes and working classes could earn, the better it was for that capitalist logic of mass consumption. So there was a kind of ironic coincidence of interests. What we consumed is a bit problematic, a bit unhealthy, a bit not so, a bit destructive of nature. But the one thing that one can say is that it was in the interests of, say, these emergent corporate sectors to promote, all kinds of medical support for, if governments could put money into helping people get better educations or higher education, into getting medical access, that was all good, because that raised their consumption. That logic is gone. We still have mass consumption, but it is not the organizing sector. So now we are entered into a period that has almost an opposite logic. Am I speaking too fast, or you understand my English, right? Yeah. I have a foreign accent in English, and they always tell me that makes it easier to understand me than if I were a Brit. Brits are really dangerous when they speak English. I hope there's no Brit that I'm offending, but if there is a Brit, then they know what I'm talking about. So when I say that what emerges now is a logic of extraction, these are exaggerated images, clearly. There's a lot of other stuff happening. As I said, mass consumption is still happening. But the dominant, that which drives the system, which then also means that it leaves behind a lot of destroyed, whether that is land that has been exhausted by plantation agriculture, whether that is the massive expansion of mining, particularly also the demands of electronics sectors, the 7 new key components that electronics needs, all kinds of things like that. So capitalism has never been benign, but we had that one period where there was an ironic coincidence that made it a bit better, that gave prosperous middle classes and working classes, a chance. Now, in the work that I do, I should say that for me there is, I'm very engaged with the question of method. But I have found, and I realize I've been practicing this for 30 years in my own peculiar way, but now I'm sort of naming it. I need a zone that I call before method. Now, as you well know, there are some very famous books that have been written and also read called after method, right? That there is a whole, my before method is a bit of an innovation here. And it basically is this notion that at times, like I think these are such times, when stabilized meanings become unstable, the fuzzy edges of paradigmatic knowledge become interesting. Those are the interesting sides. Not the heart of the paradigm, not the center of the paradigm. The center of the paradigm is still very strong and it still is very useful. But if you're interested in what is unstable, like what is today the national economy, the middle classes, national government, I mean, what does that all mean? The welfare state. They are all unstable meanings. They're changing. We're getting less than we used to get from our governments, etc. So at that point, I say, I don't throw the paradigm out of the window. Like some of my students don't get it, what I'm saying, and they say, oh yeah, I'm going to throw the paradigm out of the window. No, life is not that easy, let's put it that way. But what you can do is situate yourself where the paradigm loses power, where it's weak, where it runs into other types of paradigms, contestatory paradigms, etc. So I call that the fuzzy edges of paradigmatic knowledges. And I love that term, so very elegant, so I call what I do there analytic tactics. So tactics, is much lower category than method. But, I am having a good time with my analytic So, and here are some. So the first is what I think of as the active need, or the need to actively destabilize stable meanings. We need to keep interrogating some of the categories. What is, as I said, what is the national state today? What are the middle classes? But it's a very, very long list. And then the second point here is, the paradigm is like a circle of light. The center of the paradigm, right? It's powerful, you can see a lot. Center of light, in a dark street at night, let's put it that way. So the more you can see, the stronger the paradigm, the more you can see everything that is inside that circle of light. But the more difficult it is to see what is in the shadow around it. In other words, what does not fit the paradigm becomes very difficult to grasp, to see. And I think we need that. We need to go into those shadows. We need to see what is it where the paradigm fails. So the fuzzy edges is one moment, and then you can even go deeper. Now, the third point here, I'm really getting extremely interested in the question of territory, the territorial. I think territory is an extremely complex and important category. So I think of territory as not something that you can reduce to land, or terrain. For me, territory is as I said, a complex category with embedded logics of power, which in our Western modernity take on their most elaborate form in the working liberal state, for good or for bad, but anyhow. And embedded logics of claim-making, which again in our Western modernity take their most elaborate form in citizenship, working citizenship. But complex as this meaning is, if you just have a singular understanding of territory, as we do today, which is national sovereign territory, then it is not working analytically. It's just sitting there taking a long siesta. And I want to make it work. So I use territory, and I'll touch a bit on that. I argue that high finance constructs territories for itself that cut across traditional boundaries, east, west, north, south, etc., that cut across issues of law and conventions and inherited whatevers. So to me, the territorial is something that we should deploy in multiple ways, precisely because it is complex, precisely because it cannot be reduced to terrain, land, earth. Expulsions, I will be talking a bit more. And then finally, sort of in this list, the notion that it is made, whatever the X, for good or for bad. It doesn't just fall from the sky, ready-made. So I like to say, I like this. I'm not thinking of the makers movement. This is just, we make, sort of the strong word there. We made this. This is extraordinary. In 20 years, the we here is a rhetorical we, right? We managed to kill one of the biggest interior seas. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Aral. to this. By the way, all the data that I use on these kinds of things comes from the sciences. This is not whatever the social scientist putting this. This is an achievement. This is a capability. I'm clearly not using capability a la Amartya Sen, right, where it is positive. And I'm really troubled when language has a singular, sort of is marked in a singular way. Like when you say in English, capability, I don't know how it would be in French, but I think it's probably the same. You know, it comes marked positively. There is something positive embedded in the word. And I think that is a real problem. I want to free up that word, which is a very good word, capability, and allow it to assume what could be positive time one can become negative time two, etc., and vice versa. But for me, clearly, when I say capability, I'm trying to emphasize something about making, about something that you say, it took us only 20 years to do this? This is amazing. And this is even more amazing. 1 billion years of, ice sheet cover on Greenland, gone. We did that. So clearly this is an ironic move on my part, and the question, the challenge is, what else can we make that might be a bit more positive? But the notion that I want to capture is, again, the fuzzy edges of paradigms, all of that, and the notion of making. And the making, can we make good systems? Can we make complex capabilities? These are complex capabilities that we deployed. It took a lot of stuff to do that meltdown. This didn't just, happen. No, we made it. And so, etc. You get the point, right? Now, let me start with a few cases where I'm beginning with the simplest one, where one can sort of see, on the one hand, this notion of a logic of extraction, and on the other hand, sort of, ambiguities or mess-ups. I don't know if the word in English, a mess-up. It's messy. It's something messy, something that mixes stuff, that etc. So this phrase, who owns the city? Nobody owns the city. So I'm messing up when I ask that question, this notion that the city is a mixture of domains, public, private. Nobody owns a city. Then are you talking about something else if you own it? I'm messing it up. I'm doing this purposefully. So I want to show you just a few figures. So I'm looking at the top 100 cities that have received, where I'm just looking at the buying of property by national and foreign companies. Minimum price $5 million. So we're not talking cute little thingies here. And this is yearly data. This is this is an old history in many ways, but what I'm emphasizing is a new history, a history that really takes off after the 2008 crisis, and that by this year, this is mid-2013 to mid-2014, we can see its shape, and we have quite a bit of data about it. So the total of the 100 cities from mid-2013 to mid-2014 of these acquisitions of property, this is not site development, this is just buying existing property, very fancy property mostly, was $600 billion. That's quite a few zeros, by the way. Huh? Billion is, I know that we have different language for that. Now, from mid-2014 to mid-2015, I just got those data, it was over $1 trillion. That's even more zeros, and that's a very sharp growth rate. So this is real. This is happening. This is new, etc. Just little footnote at the side, and remember it because I'm going to return to what that tells us. Singapore, which is a very smart, intelligent leadership. We may not agree with their preferences or choices, but they're smart. So they know what they do. They manage, as you know, many ports. I guess they manage, who told me the port of Ghent? No. Does Ghent have a port? No, Ghent doesn't have a port. Ghent has a port. Okay, so Singapore, Singapore is very global. You know about this, I don't need to elaborate, but so Singapore just bought a vast stretch of Detroit. You know Detroit, right? Dying city. It's not dying by its own device. It was killed by whatever. So there are still people, it's degraded, but they bought a big land. And they have no hurry to announce the acquisition, nor to tell us what they're going to do with it. They just bought it. And you have many such examples, okay? Stuff, as we say in America, Americans have ways of using the English language. Stuff happens. Stuff happens. It's a good phrase. I mean, it's not very elegant. You don't want to do it when you're getting an honoris causa, say. Stuff happens. No, not a good idea. So now here are the 100 cities include a lot of cities in Asia, also cities in China, etc. And here you see a kind of distribution, right? That at some point it all becomes sort of equal. It just goes around. I, by the way, did recently a study on Paris. But and I published it in La Tribune, and most Parisians that come, that I talked with, etc., they had never heard of this. But there is a lot of stuff being bought by Kazakhstan, in Paris. This is an invisible history. If you live in the city, you don't see it. The building is the same. So anyhow, it's sort of funny sometimes what happens. But, and here is foreign investment. Now there you see that London is much higher than New York. New York is mostly national investment, etc. Now, there are sort of funny interpretations that happen. Let me just mention a case that concerns London and Qatar. The Qatari royals. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So the Qatari royals now own more of central London than the Queen of England. Don't you love that? I mean, you couldn't make it up. If you made a fiction movie about it, they wouldn't believe it. But there it is. Now, I should also make a footnote that the main owner of central London is not the Queen either. Huh? It's a duke. It's an old sort of family. But still, it's a significant fact. And a lot of people get very upset about this notion. Huh? I don't think that whether a foreigner owns it or or foreign corporation or national, I don't think that matters a lot. But but it tells us something, and that is when people say, but that's sort of gentrification. Gentrification is a very common term, right? I think that if we still, that's gentrification, we are closing a door onto an emergent reality that is actually a bit more charged than simply saying gentrification. And so one question for me in all of this is, are we actually witnessing an emergent epoch that is enabling ownership of urban land? They buy the properties, but in the end, are they actually buying urban land? And that is why the Singapore example is so interesting. There it's quite transparent that they're buying urban land because there's nothing on that land. There are poor people living on that land. But, so that then changes the algorithm. And when you add to that site development, when they develop sort of mega projects and all of that, you have a transformed, if you want, urban landscape. Now here, what I also wanted to point out is, so here's Amsterdam. You can hear me, right? So look at the rate of increase. They vary enormously. Shenzhen, China, okay, we say, well, of course, but Amsterdam is made in shock. When, a big Chinese company just bought a whole bunch of beautiful grachthuizen, and it was like, oh my God, what happened here? So people are a bit taken by surprise, I must say. Now here again, you have that same distribution, much sharper. There you see a mix of places, etc. Now, so, I said that we can't really see that ownership has shifted, except if they put a big sign, we now own this, but they don't do that, class. So one way of thinking, so what does this actually mean? And so London here is a good example. I love this example. These are many of these are landmarked buildings, so it's very good taste. These are, Chinese company bought these. These are quite a few very distinguished buildings, and they go all around, it's a very central area of London. And, but you don't, when you walk past that, you just see some of these buildings are really bad. This, I would say, is pretty bad taste. I hope I don't offend anybody. But most of them are really actually quite reasonable. And but you don't see it when you're walking in London. It's not that it says, I'm now owned by a Chinese, So these are sort of these materialities that are actually invisible. I find that very intriguing. Now, they're also doing something in the in the United States, which is not such good taste. So they have taken a huge plot of land called Atlantic Yards. I don't know if any of you. It's one of the biggest plots underused. It's full of stuff, but it's sort of underused on some level in New York City. And there were sort of a kind of manufacturing that service sectors like museums and architecture firms, so it's that kind of, so it's very advanced manufacturing, but it just looks like manufacturing. So they're getting rid of all of that. Then there is a whole bunch of artists who could no longer afford to live in Manhattan or Brooklyn, the new Brooklyn, and so are living there, and it's just great. And then you have very modest people who have been living there for a very long time. Many are working class people. Well, they're getting rid of all of that, and they're putting 14 towers like this. Now, apartment buildings. Expensive luxury apartment buildings. Now, here are 2 points. One is the transformation itself that we're talking about. But the other one is that, so yes, they are raising the density of that area, making it much denser. But they're actually, in my reading, de-urbanizing Atlantic Yards. You understand what I'm saying, right? So it sort of is an invitation to really think that density by itself is not enough to have a city. Now, in medieval times, if you were walking on the hills there and you saw density, many buildings, you said, that's a city. And you were right. But today, density by... So we really need to re-inquire then what is a city. Now, just to give a few figures on these 100 cities, these are the top 100 cities I was talking about. They account for 10% of the world population, 30% of the world's GDP, but 76% of property investment. That's pretty disturbing. By the way, I forgot to mention one thing, which is sort of a very cute item there, here. So this Chinese I'm sorry for this. This Chinese complex, this area is called Atlantic Yards. It has a reputation of being sort of industrial. So the Chinese owners decided to give it a more elegant name, and they called it Pacific Yards. Do you understand how funny that is? But, in there, of course, if you were a language person, you say, yeah, but the Pacific is their ocean, so to speak. You know what I mean? The Atlantic, they have zero access to. They would have to do a lot of, whatever. So anyhow, yeah. So another dimension now, again, back to this, so using the city here as one of the elements, is the literally inventing of new types of housing markets. And so this is one of them that is called superprime housing market. And here you just see a few. But these are minimum prices. This is a very sort of elite kind of setup. By now, the minimum price in Monaco is much higher than 18 million. These data come from the Financial Times. They did a huge project on this, and I also worked on that. And that must have been about 3 years ago. So, and there are the main nationalities. So look at Dubai. This, I would say, is the most sympathique variable about Dubai I have seen, or let's say I have seen in a long time, which is that, it actually has African elites. Now, the elites may not be so nice and sympathique. None of these elites are particularly... they're money bags. But then you have Kenya, which none of the others have. So you see, and there is actually much more, but I don't think it's not showing here. I wonder. No, okay. We just move on. And here are some of the interiors. Many of these properties, this is a luxury property. Many of these properties are not used. So again, the question comes up. Are we seeing the buying of urban land? How do you buy urban land nowadays? You buy it via properties. And this clearly took quite a while for something to get so degraded, right? This is not a question of months, it's a question of years. And this one is even better. how long does it take for that thick, beautiful moss to grow, in an interior house? We're talking quite a bit. So the question is, again, what is happening here, if this is not about living? In Manhattan now we have these pencil buildings. They call them pencil buildings. Has any of you seen it? They are because they come from small sites, but they have developed engineering that allows you to create an extremely tall structure. And they are mostly dark, they are it's like a way of occupying land. Now, I just want to dwell a minute on this question of land, urban land. Most cities have very vague regimes, and they can vary enormously about who actually owns urban land. So it's not clear at all. The contracts that are being invented, shaped by brilliant legal minds, brilliant creative accountants, on behalf of these corporations that are buying, they are very impressive contracts. Here is my concern. If we get to the point, which now we're just arriving, I'm doing a project on this, we need to establish legal regimes about who actually owns urban land. In other words, the land that is beneath, the buildings. These contracts, which are corporate contracts that give the benefits, to the corporations that bought the properties, these contracts may well become sources for urban land law. You understand what I'm saying, right? That is something that has me very concerned. So I have a sort of legal scholars who are specialists, one in Mumbai, one in Cape Town, etc., in various Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, who are looking at this question, what is the regime for ownership of urban land? So that's a sort of an open question. Now, back to all of this buying of land, etc. Why does all of this matter, really? And here I want to say that, for me, a critical element is that the city, our big cities, they don't have to be big, but they have to be slightly anarchic. They can't be, they're certainly not gated communities. So a real city is one of the spaces, today one of the few spaces, where those without power can make a history, a culture, an economy. Think of immigrant communities, something like that. And then, secondly, the capacity that the city has to make us all, even if it is just for moments, into urban subjects. Not religious, not racial, not class, not whatever, urban. And I love this this notion of, at rush hour traffic. I have an image that is coming. So these are just moments in the routines, the daily routines of a city when we become urban subject. But the urban subject is a very special subject. And one language that I sort of like to bring in is, it really is the city with its capabilities hacking all the other more specific, the religious, the class, the gender. See what I'm getting at, right? So this is a moment, this is one of those moments when we all become urban subject. The poor, the cleaning woman, the professional, the doctoral student, etc. We're all trying to catch the train at rush hour. That is sort of a very elementary image. Now, what is the threat today? What is it, that is generating some of these novel formations, and coming back to what I said at the beginning about logics of extraction? So one language that we could use is, what is the steam engine of our epoch? That which can make a new ordering, not which can change everything. That's very important. It's just about making a new type of ordering, or in a simpler way, what is in and what is out. Now, usually people, when I give them a chance to answer, they will say digital technology. And I think digital technology was, at some point, almost like a mini, not many, but mini steam engine. But I think today it's infrastructural. It's everywhere. Today the question is, how is it getting used? The indeterminacy of the infrastructural comes in play, I would say, today with digital technology. So in that sense, to me, it's more infrastructural. And by infrastructure, I mean something that I have a very abstract sort of notion of it, or elusive. Necessary, but indeterminate. Train tracks. You can use them to carry bombs, or you can use them to carry food for poor people, that kind of a thing. So for me, the steam engine of our epoch is actually finance. And as I said at the start, finance is an extractive sector. It's not like traditional banking. Traditional banking is more like that mass consumption model that I was talking about. The more, the merrier. The traditional bank sells money, you pay a price, interest, etc., etc. We all need it, but finance is truly different. So I think of finance as an extractive sector, and I want to illustrate here a few of the things that I mean. So number one, this is just one bit of finance, it doesn't matter. It happens to be a very brilliant, innovative, and extraordinarily destructive instrument, credit default swaps. It did lead to the 2008 crises, etc. But that's not the point. The point is, look at that curve of growth. In other words, from 2001 to up there, 2007, doesn't show, well, it's 2007 up there. So in 6 years, it grew from less than $1 trillion to 62 trillion. Think of anything that has that rate of growth. I have tried, nothing. This is extraordinary. Now, when I confront these kinds of numbers, I need to interrogate them or interpolate them. What am I, 62 trillion, what does that mean? So first stop, 62 trillion, at that time, 2007. So I'm just going to play everything off 2007, just as a criterion. 2007 is, of course, the year before the crisis, right? Explodes. The crisis is already in the making, but it really explodes in 2008. So at that time, if you ask, for instance, well, what's the global GDP of all the countries in the world at that moment? 54 trillion. Well, finance can very easily surpass GDP of a country. That's not in, so, you say, okay, fine. Now, then I ask myself, for instance, well, what was the total value of finance in 2007? 600 trillion. Okay, there you are beginning to get something. But it's still incomplete, it's still wobbly. You know that 600 trillion is really a lot. That's a lot more than the 54 trillion of global GDP of all the countries in the world. But so I ask myself, for instance, so what's the actual value of currencies, all the currencies in the world, as issued by central banks? That's a wobbly measure because of exchange rates change, all of that. But still, it is so. So in 2007, it was about 250 trillion. Now I have enough elements to say, well, finance cannot be simply thought of as money. And I take it a step further, partly as provocation, and I say, finance is not about money. Finance is a capability. Finance sells something it does not have. And in selling what it does not have, it becomes terribly creative. And it's brilliant, actually, brilliant minds. So it is it's nothing to do with microeconomics. You can understand traditional banking through microeconomics. You cannot understand finance. It's algorithmic math, the math of physicists. That which cannot really, so, and so out of that then comes this notion, how does finance actually extract? Well, it extracts by producing brilliant instruments that it deploys, and I'll give you some examples. And it is really about extracting a value, and then it doesn't matter what happens. So those brilliant instruments, and I have seen them, 16 steps, for reasons I can explain later, maybe in questions and answer, because it can take a while, in order to be able to extract. That's complicated, I know, but so let me just give you one case of extraction, finance as extraction. So this is a famous case. The data comes from the Central Bank of the United States. So it is the subprime mortgage. You have all heard of it, probably, et cetera, et cetera. And the critical thing is that this is not about providing housing. This is a very different circuit that gets mobilized. The time is very specific. Finance has created extraordinarily speculative instruments, etc., etc. The investors are asking the financial system, give me some asset-backed securities. Finance has to, at that point, invent, discover, etc., instruments that can be asset-backed. There was at that point not much. We're really talking the early 2000s, the late 1990s. There was not much that was not already financialized. All the fancy buildings were already financialized. All the commodities, oil, etc., financialized already. You know about this, right? Aluminum, everything combined. What was left was about 30% of the households in the United States who were too poor to ever imagine that they could have a house. Now, so this was not, so here is how it went. For the instrument to work, this is truly, it's brilliant and so absolutely wicked. It's cruel disaster. So for the instrument to work, the intermediate agents had to manage to sell, to get signatures from buyers, 500 a week for each agent. In a period of 6 to 7 years, 15 million plus contracts were signed. Now you get the figures, right? 500 a week for a given agent signed. So what they wanted was a signature that would represent then a house. The challenge of the instrument was delinking the value of that modest little house that didn't count for anything from the instrument, because those investors are not stupid. So it was pure extraction. All they extracted was a signature on a contract. That little bit of asset, which, they spliced it out. There were only so many little houses, so to say. They spliced it up. And so at one point your asset in your complex instrument, which was mixed with very high-grade debts, so it looked very good, may have been the toilet, a piece of wall, a bit of that little modest house. I hope that I'm communicating. Now, according to the central bank, there are many quotes about this, when Bernanke, the head of the central bank, steps down from his position, he says, he says all the good things, and then he says, and there are two intractables in the situation. And one of them was this. And he said, this is mid-2014, he said, over 14 million people will lose their homes. Foreclosure is different from home, etc. So here are the figures. These are annual figures. And you see in 2014, you still have over 1 million. These are households. A household can have one person, 3 people, whatever, right? So over 14 million households basically lost their house. Now here are a couple of elements that I want to bring to bear. These are annual, these are not cumulative, these are annual. Now here is something that I want to bring to bear. This is up to 30 million people, you understand, right? 14 million households, could be more or less than that. This is an amazing amount of people. Think of the population of Belgium. It gives you an idea. And they are invisible. This is a geography that we have to imagine. We don't see this event. We just don't see it. So to me, there is this juxtaposition of the massiveness of this event, the full materialities, the houses, the bodies of the people, and it's sort of when sort of in the practices of daily life, it's invisible. We could not even have a thing that has 30 million people on it, a slide with 30. So there is something there. Now, moving very quickly on, this instrument, which is truly brilliant, it's the math, as I said, of physicists, but the physicists are not guilty here. It's the financial firms that employ them. I just want to make sure that that's clear. But so this is now entered, and Germany is among the high. The worst is Hungary. These are households. So a household, each one, and this is not cumulative, every year. So Germany is now up to 1 million households, and so is Hungary. There's also Latvia, etc. So this, and wait till this instrument hits India with its growing, middle classes, and China, etc. It is truly an extractive instrument. I hope that I communicated that. Now, the outcome of this is, of course, empty urban land, underutilized urban land. You marry that with the first part, where I showed all the acquisition of property and the item from Singapore. You begin to get a picture of something is changing. Now, one way of framing the whole thing is to ask, are we really dealing with a new systemics here? And I say yes, and I like to point, I want to show you just a few graphs. Can you hear me when I speak like this? Yeah. Okay, so you see the years here, right? These are the years when this new epoch begins. So you are... Okay. I said a financier. So here you see, right? And this is when I'm beginning to write my global city book, and I'm beginning to see this new economy that is installing itself in the old economy. So in New York City, the language, when you look, at this period of the 1980s, the language in New York City is dying. All the big corporations were leaving, and it looks like, many corporate jobs were lost, the secretaries, etc. But in those hulks of buildings, a whole new economy was installing itself. So this is this very big experience. This was very important for my book, at least. And so there you see it grows. It begins to really grow. This is the global era, the vast deregulation, privatization. Then it really takes off. This is corporate profits and after tax. Then you have the crisis, which lasted about 2 hours for them. That is still going on for most of the middle class and the working classes. And here is the critical point. After that, profits go even higher. Now, it has long been observed by certain critical scholars that finance thrives on crises. There are many ironies here. One of them is that in this case, for instance, because finance was in crisis, many governments, and certainly the United States government, enabled finance. They passed a lot of citizens' money, so to say, via central banks, etc., to the financial sector. Now, so that curve over there is extremely, that is part of the, if you want this new formula. This is even worse. This is corporate assets. And there, you barely see it. It's like a little thing. It looked like it lasted half an hour. In both cases, it's a few years of crisis. But again, after that, higher than before. And again, this has to be juxtaposed to the fact that there are all kinds of sectors in these economies that are losing ground. Governments are getting poorer. So extractions of multiple kinds are happening. You have accumulation of profits, of wealth, etc. on one side of the economy, and then you have middle classes getting poorer, working classes getting poorer, governments getting poorer. Look at Germany. Germany's debt in 1980 was 13% of GDP, right? Well, by 2010 it was 44, and now it's over 50. Even Germany, which is truly a well-run economy, as capitalist economies go, they can no longer do, they are poorer than they used to be, they can no longer do some of the things they used to do. So something is happening, and really one way in which you can look at it, the modest middle sectors that were enabled by mass consumption as dominant logic, post-World War II era, they are getting poorer. Then you have the governments getting poorer. You have a lot of small firms, independent firms, no longer making it because franchises of big corporations move in, compete with them on lower prices, and throw them out, right? Governments getting poorer. If all the big firms were also getting poorer, okay, then you say, all right, we have a problem of design of the economy, so to say, but they're getting richer. The corporations are richer, that was those graphs that I showed before, than they have ever been. And I should really correct this. There are about 3,600 corporations that are truly the global corporations that are capturing a lot of stuff. There are hundreds, thousands of small corporations that are just regular firms. The corporate format in itself is not bad, because it means that you don't have an owner who can, run the whole thing. You have an intermediate layer. So in many smaller firms, and in many also big corporations that are reasonable, but there are these 3,600, whatever exactly, corporations that they are really, when we talk about the global corporates, that negative language, the corporates, we're talking about those. It's not all corporations. I just wanted to clarify that. Now, here are, I don't think I'm looking at my clock. Anyhow, distributions, I'm just going to pass by. So here's another one, interesting one, ratio of 1% wealth to medium wealth. So it just grows, and then after the crisis, it goes further. It's just unbelievable. Now, I have a whole section that I'm very happy to leave the slides here with darling Etopia. Where is Etopia? Yeah, okay, fine. And but I'm going to run through them. But this is the land grabs. I think people are familiar with that. This is also extraction. Huh? This is an extraction sector, wiping out smallholder agriculture, killing land. Land is dying. Midwest in the United States is dying. You can't see it. They use so much fertilizer that it all looks beautiful green. But the temperature, just in the last 4 or 5 years, in the Midwest, which defines itself as the bread basket of the world, the temperature has gone very, very hot. It's dying. Suddenly it will be dead. This has just happened in California, that some areas that suddenly they were dead. Suddenly the death, the process of dying, becomes visible when it dies. Before that, all the fertilizer and all of that, just keep it camouflaged, I guess. I don't know. These are... this is a wonderful project I'm doing with my son. I forgot I had this slide in here. So this is actually worth talking about. So he is truly a brilliant guy, unlike his mother. But and so when he hears me talk, he says, "But the key codes that finance and the corporates and the mining companies use, through which they scale up their capabilities enormously, they're not particularly brilliant key codes. Can't we design key codes that take us in the opposite direction?" Anyhow, so that is what we are, colonizing the scalar niche. We, the others, colonizing. That is a bit the project. It's really quite fun. Now, I want to end with a sequence of slides that I'm running through, but again, I'm leaving it all here for those of you who want to see. And sort of, I've given you elements that are negative. They're negative for a majority of people. And so one question that we can ask is, who are we the citizens today? Citizenship, I always think of citizenship as an incompletely theorized contract, between the citizen, the subject, whatever, and and a government, a state, the state, whatever you want to say. And it has gone through many different shapes, so why should it not once again change? It seems to me that it is a profoundly unstable meaning. Some of the stuff I've shown you is part of the empirics, if you want. But now I want to show you something else, which has to do with the notion that we are really losing rights. This is a project that I have. I'm counting the rights we're losing. It's really very difficult task, because if we existed in our law, in legal systems, as a Christmas tree, if I lose a right, oh my God, I lost a right. You would see it like a Christmas tree, the baubles, you get me. We don't exist like that. We don't exist at all. We are a distributed condition. The citizen does not exist visibly in the law. What exists is an extraordinary distribution of systems, legal moments, systems, particularities, where our rights are distributed. To find out that you have lost a right is actually a murderously challenging task. It's just, so I have a few people now around the world that we're doing that. Now I want to ask, this is in the public domain, who has seen this map before, except at one of my lectures, because I often show this? Nobody has seen it. Okay, this has been in the public domain for quite a while. When I show it in the United States, almost nobody has seen it. It was published in the Washington Post, not an obscure newspaper. Nobody saw it. I find that interesting. Same thing what I said in passing about the money that secretly the federal bank, our Fed, passed on to people, to the global community that I was alluding to, 7.7 trillion. The Financial Times, one of the best newspapers, had front coverage of everything. 21,000 requests for the cheap money. That is after the Freedom of Information Act option came in. Nobody has seen it, almost nobody. I mean, I find this absolutely so. There's always for me something interesting about what we see and what we don't see. Now, this is 10,000 buildings, full-time gathering data about all of us. So I like to say, if your grandmother was there slurping on some wonderful coffee in downtown Manhattan for 2 hours, she's in there. The question is, how do they manage? I mean, this is vast amounts. They don't manage. They don't go there. That's not the first stop for say, the National Security Agency. The first stop is good old prejudice, not even sleuthing, you know, sleuthing, the sleuth. Huh? So, Muslim, let's go check him out. It's that brutal and that elementary. Once they have the person, the name, etc., then they go in that data set and try to see with whom all this person is connected. You have heard about this probably. Europe is developing this too, not at this scale. I mean, the United States is just... and this Washington area, by the way, they're building 33 new buildings. The surface occupied by the data gathering buildings is much bigger than the Pentagon. The Pentagon is huge. It's unbelievable. So the logic of this system is that for our security, we first are suspect. Everybody. You know, you really stand back and you say, who benefits from this? Well, the tech companies, the construction companies, there are 1 million brilliant physicists and mathematicians working there, you know, and many of them are foreign. It's quite international, actually. They all work on the top secret clearance. Mr. Snowden comes out of that, but out of the Hawaii building, that is not shown here. And so it's problematic, it doesn't work, it's abusive, it produces extraordinary mistakes. But nobody's going to stop it. In fact, the model is spreading. Now, I want to just focus on a couple of things here. So this is data that is now in the public domain. It wasn't always in the public domain, but now it is. So who's dangerous? Look at that. Veterans are dangerous because they can come back from war embittered. They have a right to be embittered after those wars, but environmentalists. Okay, so it goes on. Now here is, thank you, Mr. Snowden and Julia Rignon, what we know the NSA knows. The point here is not for you to read all this stuff. This is page after page. Here you can just focus on a few. For instance, our NSA secret agency can hack into the UN video conferencing system. Have you ever been to UN conferences? They are really boring. On and on and on, because all diplomatic moves, you know, they have to, they can do that. Oh, Jesus Christ, you know. Anyhow, it goes on into more. All right, I leave you with that. Thank you very much.